So have you guys seen this Bitcoin power law chart?
Mm.
It's like everywhere right now.
Yeah, it's definitely gotten some attention, that's for sure.
People are going crazy over it,
Yeah.
especially on like all the crypto threads. I even saw someone on 4chan calling the guy who made it, get this, the Michelangelo of the bit.
Wow, the Michelangelo of the bit. That's quite a title to live up to.
Right. Like, come on, Michelangelo. But it definitely makes you wonder, what's got everyone so fired up?
Well, trying to predict the price of Bitcoin,
Oh, tell me about it.
it can be a bit of a fool's errand. I mean, it's almost like trying to predict the weather,
Totally.
in the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah, it's volatile.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop people from, trying.
Oh, absolutely not. And it makes sense, right? If you could somehow know the future, even just a glimpse.
Especially when it comes to something like Bitcoin.
Exactly. Where the potential gains could be, well, let's just say life-changing. People are always going to be looking for an edge.
For sure. And this power law model claims to do just that, to give us that edge. So for those of us who haven't been glued to the charts, break it down. What is this power law thing all about?
Okay, so imagine, right, you're looking at a Bitcoin price chart, like a regular old price chart.
Right.
This model, basically what it does is it draws two lines on that chart.
Two lines, okay.
One above the historical price and one below. So you've got these two lines kind of framing the historical price data.
Okay, so above and below where the price has actually been.
Exactly. But here's the thing. These lines, they aren't just some random lines, okay? They're actually calculated using, a statistical method called linear regression. It's a fancy way of saying it takes all the past price data for Bitcoin and it tries to find the trend, the underlying pattern.
Oh, okay, so it's like connecting the dots, but with a really complicated mathematical equation.
Yeah, pretty much. But that's where things get, I think, even more interesting because these lines, the whole point of them is that they're supposed to represent what's called a power law. And power law is basically this mathematical relationship that suggests there's predictable growth. So in this case, predictable growth for Bitcoin.
Whoa, okay.
And so by extending these lines right into the future on this chart, the model is saying, hey, I can predict where the price of Bitcoin is headed.
Hold on. If it's supposedly as simple as drawing lines on a chart, why isn't everybody doing this?
Yeah.
What's the catch here?
Well, there's always a catch, right? And I think the big catch here, the big caveat is just because, something has followed a pattern in the past,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue to follow that pattern in the future, right?
Oh, for sure.
So it's think about it like this. You could probably predict, the sunrise tomorrow based on what happened today.
Yeah, probably.
But could you predict if, a giant cloud was suddenly going to block the sun?
Right. Unpredictable stuff happens.
Exactly.
And the crypto world. Yeah, there are a lot of metaphorical clouds, I feel like.
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of them just floating around. But before we get into all of that and kind of the potential pitfalls, I think it's important to, to look at what this power law model is actually predicting.
Oh, yeah. And I have a feeling, from what I've seen, these numbers aren't just interesting, they're kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, they're definitely something.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, how does this actually work? We talked about linear regression, but how does that play into this model specifically?
So essentially what linear regression does, right, is it tries to find what you would call the line of best fit.
The line of best fit, okay.
Through a scatter plot of data points. And in this case, those data points are, you guessed it, Bitcoin's price over time.
So each dot on the chart is
a specific price at a specific time.
Got it.
And you're trying to draw, imagine you're drawing a line through a bunch of dots that are scattered across your graph. And you're trying to find that line that comes closest to hitting as many of those dots as possible.
Okay, so far so good.
Mm-hmm.
We've got our dots, which is the past prices.
Yeah.
And we're drawing a line through them to kind of show the general trend. But how do we go from a simple line, on a chart to predicting the future price of Bitcoin?
Yeah.
That's where the power law thing comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
where the power law comes in. So
Mm.
the idea behind a power law is that, certain phenomena, certain things, for example, the growth of cities or the popularity of websites, they tend to follow this predictable pattern over time.
Right. I've heard of that.
And the people who created this Bitcoin model, they basically believe that Bitcoin's price, it also follows a similar kind of pattern.
So they're saying it's not just randomly going up and down. There's an actual force, this power law that's pushing it upward.
That's the gist, yeah. Now, whether or not you buy into that whole idea, that's a different story, right?
Right.
But let's just say, for a moment, let's just entertain the possibility that they're onto something with this model.
Okay, yeah.
The predictions that it makes based on this whole power law idea, they're pretty wild.
Wild is an understatement.
Hmm.
From what I've seen, we're talking like $100,000 per Bitcoin
By 2028.
by 2028. And it doesn't even stop there, right? It keeps going.
Oh, yeah, it keeps going.
Like $1 million a coin by 2037.
$1 million a coin.
I mean, come on. Are we talking about Bitcoin or are we talking about like winning lottery tickets at this point?
I know, it's pretty mind-blowing to think about. Just like, imagine for a second if those predictions actually came true.
Yeah,
We'd be talking about a completely different financial landscape.
totally.
Bitcoin, potentially. I mean, it could become a major, major global currency.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even rivaling, gold
Wow.
in terms of its value and its stability.
Okay, that's a thought.
Yeah.
But let's not forget, like we were talking about earlier, the unpredictability of, well, everything, but especially like crypto.
Yeah.
Right. I know our friends over at Decrypt, they had some like pretty insightful, maybe a little bit sobering thoughts on this whole issue.
Yeah, they made some really good points. I think one of the biggest ones is this whole idea of like unrealistic expectations
Oh, yeah, for sure.
among investors.
People see these like crazy high predictions.
Right. And they're like, I'm going to be rich.
This is it. This is what my ticket.
Exactly. I'm going all in. And, that kind of thinking, it can be really dangerous because.
To create a bubble, for
Yeah,
sure. We've
could.
seen it happen time and time again.
Right.
With all kinds of assets, not just crypto, where like the hype gets out of control, the prices get driven up way beyond what's reasonable,
Yeah.
and then inevitably,
It crashes.
yeah, and it's always like the everyday people who get burned the most,
Absolutely. It's definitely a case of like buyer beware.
Yeah.
Do your research, understand the risks. Don't just blindly follow the hype.
It's like that old saying, right? If it sounds too good to be true.
It probably is.
Exactly. But let's just say, for argument's sake, this power law model, it's like incredibly accurate.
Okay.
Are there other things, other factors out there that could still like throw a wrench in the works?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about such a complex system here
Yeah.
with like countless variables. You got geopolitical events, you've got regulatory changes, technological advancements.
Oh, right.
Any one of those things could like completely change the game.
It's like trying to predict, I don't know, which way a leaf is going to fall on like a super windy day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can make a guess.
You can make an educated guess, but
Yeah. Yeah. But ultimately, it's just like blowing in the wind.
it's unpredictable.
Totally. And speaking of unpredictable, I was checking out the BitBo charts, the ones we were talking about,
Yeah.
and I noticed something interesting. They actually have different update speeds, for like free users versus paid subscribers.
Oh, interesting. So you're talking about like how fast the charts actually update with the real-time price movements?
Yeah, exactly. Like, does that even matter? Does that faster data, does that actually give like paid users a significant advantage? We're probably talking about like milliseconds here, right?
Right.
But in the world of crypto trading, milliseconds, I mean, that could be the difference,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. In the world of high-frequency trading, milliseconds can make or break you.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I mean, these are algorithms, right? Making decisions based on like fractions of a second.
So it's like they're getting a head start in the race, essentially.
Yeah, you could think about it that way.
But even with a head start, can you really like outmaneuver the unexpected?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I know, right? It really makes you think. We've talked about all the potential problems, how unpredictable the markets are, but I got to say, there's still something about this power law model, like the elegance of it, That kind of draws me in.
Yeah, I get it. It's kind of like, there's this inherent human desire to find order in chaos, right?
Totally.
Like, we want to believe that we can predict the unpredictable.
Exactly. And this model, for some people, it might be a way to like make sense of Bitcoin, because it can be kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Oh, for sure. It's a lot to wrap your head around. I kind of think of it like it's like a compass, right?
Okay.
It might not always point to true north,
Right.
but it gives you some sense of direction.
That's a good analogy.
But here's the thing about compasses. They're only really useful if you actually know how to use one.
Oh, totally. You wouldn't just like walk into the wilderness with only a compass and hope for the best.
Exactly. You'd want a map, some good boots, Probably a little bit of common sense wouldn't hurt either.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the same thing goes for navigating, the world of Bitcoin or any financial market for that matter.
Right.
This power law model, it can be a useful tool. It can help you understand potential price trends, but it shouldn't be the only tool in your toolbox.
Okay, so where does that leave us? I mean, we've really dug into this model. We've talked about the predictions, the limitations, this human element of wanting to be able to see the future. What's like the big takeaway here for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember, just, no matter what, is don't let the allure of a prediction, no matter how enticing it sounds,
Right.
cloud your judgment.
Yeah.
Do your own research, understand the risks, and never, ever invest more than you can afford to lose.
Words to live by for sure, especially in the crypto world. But I mean, really in any part of life, you got to be careful.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, the future of Bitcoin, much like the future itself, it's still unwritten.
That's the truth.
And, I think that's part of what makes this whole thing so exciting.
Yeah, it is. There's still so much to discover, still so much we don't know.
Exactly. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for listening, everyone. And until next time, stay curious.